Currently we are in a sermon series where we're doing kind of a quick drink of the book of Exodus. We're crushing through the entire book. And to be honest, it's incredibly difficult because there's so much good content and stories and messages and revelations for us in the book of Exodus. And so when we started studying for this, we decided to kind of stick to one theme within the book, one theme that really sticks out in this book among many themes. And we're sticking with this idea, this theme that says from bondage to freedom. And throughout the entire book of Exodus, there's this overarching theme of God delivering his people out from bondage in Egypt to freedom. That's the big overarching story, right? But within that big overarching story, there's lots of little stories, these little mini stories, little other spaces where God, while taking the Israelites on this big, long journey to freedom, there's lots of little mini places where God takes somebody from bondage into freedom. Oftentimes Moses, he's kind of the central character in this story. And so throughout the last few weeks, we've heard all these little stories. From bondage to freedom, from bondage to freedom. Even if you think about like Moses was born into bondage to some degree, like he was born and Pharaoh wanted him dead. And because of the faithfulness of his mom and her courage and because of God's deliverance, Moses was delivered. And then he ended up, being safe and his mom got to be there while he grew up and just all these really cool things. You think about Moses later on, he's in the wilderness and he's kind of in bondage. His destiny was never really fulfilled. He didn't have a lot of purpose in his life. He was just a shepherd. He wanted to see his people free. He was living in the wilderness. And then God met him in a burning bush. And God spoke some purpose into his life. And God began to deliver him from a little bit of this bondage that he was living within his destiny. And then God said, Moses, I want you to use your voice. I want you to go speak to Pharaoh. And Moses said, I'm not really a good speaker. I'm not really good at talking. I'm not that good of a dude. I'm not that strong. And God said, listen, that's bondage. You need to believe about yourself. What I think about you, I think you have a strong voice. But you know what? I'm going to give you a helper. But you know what? Your words have power, and I'm going to deliver you from that. And your voice, we're going to bring freedom into your voice, right? So there's all these little stories. There's, obviously the Moses leading his people through the Red Sea. That's a little mini part of this greater narrative. My point here is this, is I think many of us are on a long arc to freedom, and I believe all of us are actually. But sometimes we get so focused on the long arc to freedom, the big redemption, the freedom at the end of the story, that sometimes we miss the little spaces in our own lives where God is consistently bringing us from bondage to freedom. These little micro moments. And I think, if I was to be honest, I think this is a bondage in and of itself. Our inability to see God in these little moments, these little areas where he's delivering us, just those little moments where we didn't feel very lovely. And he said, you know what, Tyler, you see how beautiful those mountains are? I'm in those mountains and I love you. So just to even remember that I'm loved in just a small moment is a small journey from bondage to freedom. And so before we really dive into the scriptures I was assigned today, I just really want to encourage us, if you really had one takeaway, I would love it to be this one, for us to work on cultivating a practice of seeing the teeny little times we're delivered from bondage to freedom as we go throughout our days. And so as we've gone on that journey, here we are now following this big, long arc. Moses has just delivered the people out from Egypt. So we're at a pretty big moment. A couple weeks ago, Dr. E talked about how they were delivered out from, going through the Red Sea, and the 600 chariots were crushed and all of this stuff. And so we find ourselves in Exodus chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. It says, on the third new moon, after all the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. So they had gone out of the wilderness from Egypt, and now they're in the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in that wilderness. There Israel camped before the mountain. So here they are. They are finally Praise God, they're finally out of Egypt and in a new land. They are in a new wilderness. We've been waiting for this part of the story. Moses had led them out, and praise God, they are there. And then Moses gets up to some funny business. He starts climbing up this mountain, and all this weather comes, and there's all these clouds, and they're watching all this stuff happens. And to expedite part of the story, what happens is Moses is given the 10 Commandments. He meets God face to face, and God gives him these 10 Commandments and tells him to go down to the people and tell them to the people. Now, I was thinking about this. What if I was one of the Israelites? And here I am, having lived in generation after generation of bondage. It's all my family knew. It's all I've known. God is promising me that I'm going to become free. And here I am in my new freedom, in my new land. And then our fearless leader says, hey, you're in freedom, but here's some rules. Here's 10 rules, as a matter of fact. Ironically, that starts to not feel very much like freedom all of a sudden. Like, what the heck, God? Didn't you say we're going to be free? Didn't you say we're going to be able to live? I've been living under oppression and rules and regulations for the last 400 years. Come on, bro. You get how they might feel that way, right? In fact, I think that lots of us feel that way, even within Christianity. Like, we often talk, oh man, and God is a God of freedom, and you just come to the cross and there's so much freedom, but let's just make sure you vote this way, or let's just make sure you wear these clothes, let's just make sure you look like this, let's make sure you've not sinned for this long, let's make sure you're, like we act that way a lot of the time. And so what is the deal then really with the 10 Commandments? Why are they even there? Is this really about freedom? Is this story about freedom the whole time? Like, why do we have these rules? Why in this moment of freedom were these rules brought on to the people? Well, I think it's important that before we dive too far into considering the rules and everything that they suggest, these commandments, that we take a moment to consider the context through which God gave the commandments. You see, the commandments didn't come first. Their freedom came first. So if we look in Exodus chapter 19, verses 4 and 5, it says, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. That makes me think of Lord of the Rings. The eagle's wings, you know what I'm talking about? Now, therefore, if you indeed will obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. But notice there in this scripture, he says, listen, I bore you on the wings of eagles. You are free. And then the 10 Commandments came. You see, the 10 Commandments were not a prerequisite to the freedom and salvation of the people. The 10 Commandments were a result of their freedom. The point is this, they were already free. It was not, oh, I have to do this commandment and follow this rule and look this way and do this thing so that I can become free. This is how many of us are operating today. Man, if I just do this, then God's favor will be on me. If I look like this, then I will be free. If I do this, then God will actually love me. That's not what it was. They were already free. Does that make sense? So the commandments came as a result of their freedom. You see, they were already free. What God was doing is he was showing them how to live as a free people. You see, we are already free. The cross has already given us freedom. But what that doesn't mean is that we know how to live as a free people. I just got to go to the wedding of a guy last week. He went to prison when he was 17, and he got out just about 3 months ago. He had met somebody while he was on the inside, and they just had their wedding. And you see, his circumstances were free. He just got out after 40 years, and he just got out. And can you imagine the struggle of what it looks like to live life for him? Like, he doesn't know what an iPhone is. He doesn't know what Facebook is. He doesn't know anything of the world that we live in. You see, his circumstances were freedom. He was in a free state, but he doesn't know yet. He barely knows how to live as a free person. He's having to learn from ground zero how to live in the modern society. Does this make sense? Well, this is the case for so many other folks. You see, a couple weeks ago, Dr. E said, he said it took 400 years to get the people out of Egypt, and then it took 40 years to get Egypt out of them. Well, that's kind of what was happening here. You see, the Israelites, they didn't know anything other than oppression. For 400 years, there was an identity being formed in them, where their humanity was being stripped away, where they were being told, you're not worth loving. Your life is only as good as how many bricks you can make. They were being told the only reason you need to conceive and have kids is so that we can have more slaves. There is no love in that. There is no purpose in that. There is no identity in that. They were formed to believe myriads of things that were untrue about themselves. The primary one was that they weren't worthy of love, that their life didn't have purpose. And you could imagine for 400 years those messages being shared and shared and shared. The truth is I believe many of us have also inherited many wounds like that. Different beliefs that we've assumed because of the way our parents have spoken to us. Having to prove our worth to our dad. Having to show our mom that we're good enough and that we're put together, that we have it all together. We perceive that our mom was perfect, and so we have to be perfect. And we live in that bondage of just trying to prove that all the time. We don't feel like our spouse or our girlfriend or our boyfriend loves us very much, and we just spend all of our time trying to prove to them that we're worthy of love. But the truth is our spouses and our girlfriends and our boyfriends, they've been told that the people around them aren't worthy of love because their parents didn't feel worthy of love, and neither did their grandparents. And we've all inherited generations of these false messages about yourself. Really, we're not very different than the Israelites in this regard. So even though we are free people, I know many of us are walking around with false identities. We're not walking around with the identity. We believe this in theory, but we don't live it. How many of us are bound by just trying to impress the people around us? We're trying to put on clothes and drive cars and have businesses and do things that are trying to make us look lovely and feel lovely because we don't feel free unless we impress our coworker down the road or our neighbor down the road. Yeah, we are free, but we don't live that way. Oof, and it's sad. And so like the people of Israel, the cross has made us free. God had led the people of Israel into freedom, but we still have to learn how to live free in the new land. We have to learn how to live that way. And so what I believe is the 10 Commandments, more than just being a bunch of rules and followers, really they're tools for the formation of the spirit and the hearts of the people, for them to learn how to be a free people, how to live in their hearts and spirits in a free way. Now, as I was studying this, I actually had like 10 weeks to study this thing because like 10 weeks ago, Dr. E said, you're going to teach all the 10 Commandments in one sermon. And I was like, gee whiz, bro, take it easy on me. I'm still new around here. So I took a lot of time to read and study. And one of the really interesting things I found is that a lot of people believe that the 10 Commandments on the tablets themselves, that it's not 5 commandments on one tablet and 5 on the other. That it's actually 4, that in much of the ancient artwork and lots of the ancient teachers believe that there's actually 4 commandments on the first tablet and 6 on the other. And why is that? Well, the first tablet has everything to do with our relation to God. You should have no other idols. No other gods before me. Keep God's name holy. Keep the sacred day sacred. These first 4 commandments are really teaching the people of Israel how to worship. It's teaching them how to posture their hearts before God, of saying, listen, God must be first in your life. God, there can't be other idols. There can't be things that we put in front of God. And so by doing things like observing the Sabbath, it's a way in which you can posture your life saying, I trust that God is going to come through for me. I trust that I can only do so much in my own work. I trust that God can do more with one day than I can do in 6. It's a way of posturing yourself before God, that you should have no other gods before you. So what he's teaching the people of Israel first is to say, okay, look for God everywhere and put him first. He's teaching them how to be a worshiping people. So for us, if we're looking to live our life as free people in the new land, the first thing we have to consider is, how and where am I putting God first? And maybe more importantly, where are the places that God isn't first in my life? What are my obsessions? What are my crutches? What are the places where I'm not putting God first, where I'm not trusting him above everything else? So first, he's teaching them how to be a people that worship God. And then the second thing that's being taught to these people, how do they live in the new land, is how first to worship God, and then secondly, this is the other 6, is how to treat other people. How to treat the other people around you. Honor your parents, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet. You see, what happens is, when you first get a taste of freedom, the tendency is often to say, now I can do whatever I want for me. When you first step into freedom, the tendency is often to point to yourself and say, look at this, I have freedom, now I can do what I want. My freedom is for me. I'm excited for my freedom. Thank God I have freedom, so now I can do whatever I want. But here in the scriptures, what we see as Moses and God and the 10 Commandments are showing these newly free people is that that's not the case. The call is to first love God, and then out of your love for God, out of your worship of him, out of putting him in his right place in your heart, that will then overflow into how you treat other people, into the ways in which you treat those around you. And this, my friends, is what it looks like to live as a free people, to love God and to love your neighbor. You see, it's out of our love of God that our love of neighbor flows. And I believe, my friends, the prophets throughout the scriptures have made it clear that you cannot do one without the other. In fact, lots of us like to love God. That's honestly the easy one. Oh yeah, I want to go to church. I love to say my prayers. I love to wear my Christian clothes. I love to dress modestly. I love to show up on Easter morning and whatever, but God forbid I have to sit across the table with somebody that I disagree with. God forbid I have to talk to that person that smells bad. God forbid I have to have somebody over for dinner that has different beliefs than me. It's easy to show up to church. Nobody's stopping you. I think oftentimes when we look at the places in our life where it's hard to love our neighbor, it's a great indicator for the places where we haven't put God in the right place, which is the first bit of the commandments, right? You should put God first before everything. So where we fail to love our neighbors is often because we're trying to take control of a situation, because we're trying to hold power into a situation, because we believe we're right, because we believe we know how they're supposed to be treated. Rather than saying, maybe I don't know it all, I'm going to surrender it to God and let God be in control. I'm going to let God be the judge, and I'm just going to love other people. And so if we want to be a people who are living free in the new land, the first thing we can do is start to take inventory of the places where it's really hard for us to love people, because that will be an indicator of where your idols are. And so if you really want to be somebody who's living free in the new land, who's not just a poser, we have to get rid of the idols. In which case we have to look for where we're not loving people. In fact, in 1 Corinthians it says, if I speak the tongues of men or of angels, but I don't have love, I am just a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. He's saying, listen, say all the friggin' prayers you want, but I don't care if you don't love. Go to church, but so what? Because it's interconnected. Your love of neighbor is interconnected with your love of me. If I have the gift of prophecy, I can fathom all the mysteries and all the knowledge. And if I have all the faith that can move mountains, but if I do not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and needy over my body, and if I offer my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not love, I gain nothing. The 10 Commandments are not about keeping us as a bunch of robotic rule followers, but rather it's empowering us to be people that are fully in surrender of God. And out of that surrender is allowing us to love one another. And I think that's the call. So where have you been formed? What are the places in your life that you've been formed to not believe, that you've been formed to not put God in the rightful place in your own heart? Where have you been told of your broken belovedness? Where you don't believe you're very worthy of love, or you've got certain things that you have to protect at all costs? That's the question for us to ask ourselves. That's the 400 years of bondage, and God is saying, okay, I know you've been trying to work your way out of your addiction. I know you've been trying to work your way out. If I only do this, then this person will love me. If I only do this, then I will be good enough. If I only do that, I will be loved. God is saying, you're already loved. You're already free. Now let me lead you and love other people as you go. And this is what it means to walk into our identity as a free people. So may it be so for us. Dear Jesus, I thank you for the Sanctuary Tribe. I thank you for just all the various places that so many of us are coming from. The people in this room who are on the tales of great success and joy, the people who are on the tales of just great brokenness. God, I pray especially for the people who have been living in various forms of bondage their whole life. God, I pray that first they would recognize what you've done on the cross and that they are already free. And God, that they do not have to work their way towards freedom any longer, that is a lie. That we are a free people. Holy Spirit, as you came down on Pentecost 2,000 years ago, I pray you would come down now. And that you would enter into the hearts and the minds and the spirits of the people, and that you would empower them to see God wherever they look. And that they would begin to form a new identity where they're putting God in his rightful place in their hearts. And that then they would grow and be formed to be a people of love, loving their neighbors out of their love of God. And that would be how we are marked as a free people, not by what we get to do for ourselves, but that the world would know we are free because of how we treat our neighbor. In your name I pray, amen.
Thanks for tuning in to a message from the Sanctuary Church. For more information and media, go to our website at thesanctuarywestside.org or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube.